Hello and welcome everybody to this week's episode of Functionized Podcast. Of course, this is Dr. Mike out of Functionized Integrative Therapeutics located right here in Colts Neck, New Jersey. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about stretching. It's something that we all know for the most part the basics about, or at least know that it's something we should be doing much more than the majority of us should. But I'm going to get a little bit more in depth into other than just increasing flexibility and range of motion. What else can stretching do? Different types of stretches, and really what does the research show in terms of when should we do it, how long should we do it? So let's go ahead and get into it. First off, we all for the most part know stretching helps with range of motion. Being able to move your hips, your shoulders, your neck, whatever, a little bit more in a wider pain-free motion. It's a good goal for flexibility, but for stretching. It's good to know there's other things involved as well. When we need a stretch, the muscle is taut, whether it is from some scar tissue, adhesions, a knot, or a myofascial trigger point. The muscle is shortened. A shortened muscle is what I'll call an unhappy muscle, meaning it's not nearly as strong. We do lose strength when our muscles are tight. We also lose the power, so the ability to explode, like doing a strong jump or being able to really push, let's say in terms of a bench press or a squat, up very high. Our muscles also become less conditioned as far as muscle endurance. They tend to fatigue a little faster, and if there's already some tightness or knots in there, it's increasing the odds of end up getting more, and also predisposes you a little bit more to injury. So for the most part, stretching is good for athletic performance. Strength, power, endurance. There are a few small exceptions where it comes to sports and muscle specific, where you might want to have a slightly more taut muscle. The best example I can come off the top of my head is think of hamstrings for sprinters. Sometimes they prefer to have a little bit of a shorter, tighter hamstring to help with the stretch reflex, to be able to kind of rebound one leg forward in front of the next. To explain, like in a little example, if you put your right hand flat on a table or a surface and you take your left hand and grab a finger from your right, pull it up a little bit and let it go, you'll get a quick little snap. And that's the kind of concept with sprinters. Again, there's a few other small examples, but they are a little few and far between. So in general, stretching does help. And why would we want to have greater range of motion to begin with? Think of it, let's go to a basic squat. You're in a nice standing tall position. We come down, bringing the butt down, hips and knees flexing down to about 90 degrees. A lot of us can't do this, and that's fine. It shows we have some work to do on our flexibility. But let's say if we start doing these squats without ever increasing our flexibility, and we're only going down to, let's say, maybe 110 degrees. The muscle fibers of the quadriceps that are trying to explode are not getting the full strength gains because we're not using the full range of motion. We are meant to move within a certain degree, so it is best in our body's capabilities and overall wellness to be able to do so. But let's go ahead and talk about a few different types of stretches. I guess before that, let's talk about preparing to stretch. I'm a huge fan that you should always warm up. No matter what style stretch you do, I fully believe you should warm up. Get some blood flow, some heat into the muscle, help engorge it, because muscles that are hotter, have more blood flow, are going to be much more pliable. Think about the terms of taffy candy. If you have taffy, it gets very hard and brittle when it's cold. You heat it up just a little bit, roll it in your hands for a couple seconds, it becomes very malleable, it stretches, it flexes almost tenfold. Our muscles are very similar in that style of way. So we want to have, again, some sort of heat source coming in there. My preferred methods are either a hot shower or doing some sort of dynamic warm-up, like body weight squats or lunges if you're about ready to stretch the legs. Just going down a few times. After about 10 or 15 reps, you should notice you're able to go down a little further without really forcing it whatsoever. It's just getting the blood flow in the area to show your true flexibility, so to speak, as opposed to beginning to stretch and then kind of need to work through all of that again anyway. But let's go and start tackle a few different types of stretches. The first one's the one that is most likely the most common, which is the static stretch. For example, we stand up and we reach down, try to bend over and touch our toes or the floor. So with this stretch comes a few things. One, I guess, timing. I remember growing up through sports and athletics, we always did these stretches, 10 to 30 seconds a piece right before we started, sports practice or competition. Looking back on it, what the research kind of is suggesting is that's not always the best idea. Again, when we're doing this kind of static, long-held stretch, it's not like we're only stretching the muscle, but we're stretching the nerves, the ligaments, the vascular supply, such as arteries and veins, at the same time. So we're actually causing some ischemia, meaning lack of oxygen. Our muscles want oxygen, and it's fine. The point of the stretch is to deprive it slightly so it can pull and relax. But if we just completely cut off our oxygen supply, so to speak, to our muscles, and then we go out there and try to run, jump, perform, we are much more likely to injure ourselves again. So I guess if you're doing a static stretch before some sort of athletic performance, I recommend warming up again after you stretch, just to get the blood flow back in the muscle to help prevent any sort of strains or sprains. But now let's go ahead and try to tackle the issue of how long should we be holding this stretch. So if you're just looking for a very short-term increase to feel a little bit better, that's what 10 or 30 seconds is going to do. But really, if you want to make a semi-permanent change, more than a few hours, you're looking at holding each stretch for 2 to 5 minutes, long enough for the muscle to actually relax, some of the adhesions or trigger points to cut off the blood flow, long enough to go ahead and not really tear apart, but mesh out and re-lengthen a bit again. Where it gets really interesting is when both myself and Jim, the mad scientist saw this research article about a 30-minute stretch. We touched upon this briefly on a podcast a while back, but we did a little study on our own because this research article showed that there was a DNA change after 30 minutes of a held static stretch. This is where I do want to say I don't recommend people doing 30-minute stretches, especially if they're not used to stretching, and certainly not without a competent medical professional nearby, but we did it. So this way you don't have to. But what we did is that I did this, and then Jim and his daughter Athena, they did this as well. Our styles are very similar. We turned on the TV, half-hour show. Awesome, let's go for this. They did, I believe it was a standing straddle stretch. And I sat down having my legs separated, abducted outward. And I actually took a TheraBand on each ankle. And with each hand, I would use it to keep widening out the stretch as I went. So I'll be honest, after about 10 minutes, it got painful. It got very painful. One of the ways our bodies respond to lack of oxygen is pain. Good way to let you know something is awry. So after this 30-minute stretch, I had to get someone to literally pick up and move my legs in together and help me stand up because my muscles were deprived for the most part of oxygen for half an hour. But the cool part is that statistically, this appeared to be worth it. We took measurements before the stretch and then after the stretch, and all three of us had about a 4 to 6 inch increase in our flexibility and range of motion. That's awesome. Do we want to stretch for 30 minutes each muscle a day? I sure as heck do not, and I won't. So here's the cooler part about it, is that we actually also measured our flexibility, range of motion with the straddle stretch 1 day later, 3 days later, 1 week, 2 weeks, and a month later. And there was no difference in those times, meaning a month down the road, we all still had that 4 to 6 inch increase in flexibility. It kept. It is to a point where it's not going to last for the rest of our lives because I don't have that flexibility still now. But it was cool to show that if we stretch for that long, we don't have to do it every day. you can make a decent change with just a little bit of time and effort with the stretch. So now we're done the static, let's talk about, probably the most controversial type of stretch is ballistic stretching. So ballistic is where we do a fast, jerky motion, pushing ourselves past the range of motion we really should be able to go. Again, I really do not recommend this to anybody. The most people that will do this style of stretch is, we're talking our elite athletes. An example of this is, let's use that standing stretch to go down, touch our toes. In the static style, we just slowly bend over and kind of just like gravity and a slight push, if anything, keep us into the stretch. The style ballistic is we stand up, we launch ourselves downward and spring to touch the floor, even when we weren't able to normally. So it does do away of, it's a stretch, contract, stretch style of, a method. But it is quite likely to cause injury. I mean, if you snap outside that range of motion, you could easily pull a muscle, tear a ligament. So again, it's not really recommended, but those who do it, who are quite flexible and used to it, they're always warming up heavily first. Best example I can think of here is, if you've ever seen martial artists or someone who's used to martial arts, they'll just do these straight up kicks, like kick as high as they can over their head. They'll do that as a warm-up. That's also an example of this ballistic style stretch. So let's touch a few bit more on something I started in rehab named PNF, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. This is actually personally one of my favorite ways of being stretched and stretching somebody else. For the most part, this does require a partner. There are a few ways you can do it on yourself, but not recommended. So the main way that a PNF stretch is done is, let's use hamstring example again. We'll have someone lying down on a table, and we'll have the practitioner lift their leg while the person's lying on their back, and we'll start raising the leg. Kind of see how long it takes for the hamstring to get tight. Okay, you find where it starts to get tight. We bring the leg down. And now the person being stretched is going to force that leg down as hard as they can while the examiner is resisting it. After about 10 seconds, the examiner will say stop. The person being stretched will stop, and the examiner pushes the leg up past the range of motion where they're able to do it begin with. But the trick here is that there's almost never pain. There shouldn't be pain if done correctly. This is kind of a way to mess with your neurological system in a way to get the muscle to relax, and it's very effective. It's hard to get on some muscle groups. Hamstrings and shoulders are the most common to do, but it works very well with relaxing, tight muscles in general. The last style of stretch I want to talk about today is PIR, or a post-isometric relaxation. This is one I do to myself quite a bit. So it's similar in concept to PNF, but it tends to be a little bit slower to work. And this one I use more when someone's injured or they're having pain involved with it. So that way they don't have to do a heavy contraction like the PNF to really activate the muscle, because a lot of times if a muscle is hurting from being too tight, it hurts to move it. So the way we do PIR is, we'll use an example of, let's see, the upper traps or the neck in general, where if you want to stretch the left side, we'll take our head down to the right side and then look over to the left. And you can just start getting a little bit of an upper trap stretch at this point. But if you keep your head on your hand to help push it down, and then very lightly push your head into your hand for about 10 seconds, and then relax, it's another way, again, to half trick the neurological system to relax the muscle, and you notice a pretty rapid drop. Or by drop, I mean increase of the range of motion. Your head can drop a little bit further. Do that a couple of times, and it tends to work quite well to get rid of really nasty little trigger points that, again, I usually use it for when there is pain involved. So just kind of sum everything up very quickly. Stretching is good for us. It helps keep us out of pain, keeps us active, helps with our strength, our muscle endurance, our power. I also highly recommend warming up before you stretch. There's really no reason not to. Help keep the muscle healthy, get some blood flow going there, make it so that way you can actually be preventative stretch. Again, if you're doing the static stretch, all the research seems to show if you're trying to increase overall flexibility, aim for that 2 to 5 minutes, a very mild discomfort at the most. It should never be painful. At that point, you can overstretch and strain yourself. So, as always, if you have any questions or comments about this podcast or any of our others, please send us a direct message. You can find us at Functionize, either on Facebook or Instagram. We love hearing from you guys, getting direct messages. If there's anything that you're really interested in, questions that you're curious, I wonder if Dr. Mike or the mad scientist or Shantae knows this, ask us. We'll go ahead and we'll let you know what all the research shows and what we know of. We'll gladly help you guys out in that case. And please, if you're enjoying the material, please help us out as well. And we really appreciate those honest 5-star reviews. Again, it helps us get our material out to more people. So until next time, everybody, this is Dr. Mike out. Thank you. Stay functionized.